Ladies and gentlemen, today we give you the secrets to creating amazing interactive factions in Dungeons & Dragons for beginner, intermediate, and expert dungeon masters. We will demonstrate how to use factions to build your world in Foundry Virtual Tabletop. For new dungeon masters, the essential ingredient to successfully crafting factions is player engagement. To help you visualize this, let's create a pyramid that represents your faction. The Dungeon Master starts at the top of the pyramid and works their way down to create a faction. The players start at the bottom and work their way up to interact with the faction. It's this beautiful top-down and bottom-up structure that balances creativity with player engagement. At the top of the pyramid is your faction's motivation. Ask yourself what your faction would do if they had all the power, wealth, and influence they wanted. What would they do if they had total control? This should be an infinite pursuit that has no destination. This is an ideal that cannot be reached. For example, maybe you want a legacy. You want your name and accomplishments to be remembered for all of time and all around the world. Maybe you want world peace. You want to end wars and conflict to create a permanent utopia. Maybe you want justice. You want all the criminals to be punished and fair conduct for all. Think about what paradise would look like in your organization and create a theme. My recommendation is to choose motivations that your players would agree and disagree with. The level below motivation are your organization's goals. What are the stepping stones to making that motivation a reality? Think about what you need to do to achieve paradise. These are real and achievable pursuits that have an ending. Here is an example to help you craft goals. Let's say your motivation is justice. It's probably a good idea to hire sheriffs and marshals to catch criminals so they can be punished. Thus, your faction creates a goal of hiring 100 sheriffs to enforce law and order in the capital. After you catch the criminals, you would want them to receive a fair trial so you don't accidentally punish an innocent person. Thus, your faction has a goal of creating a high court of justice to judge people. After you convict your criminals, you want them to reform themselves into better people. Thus, your organization has a goal to build a jail and rehabilitation center. The possibilities are endless. My advice is to keep each goal achievable and connected with a real consequence in your adventure. Something memorable should happen after each goal is completed or thwarted. You want your players to have an impact on the world you create. Goals are their way of saying yes or no to your faction's ideas. It's their way of influencing the story. Give them that freedom and you will be rewarded with excited and emotionally invested players. The next level down is game theory. Ask yourself how this faction achieves its goals. What are the methods that it uses to gain power, influence, and wealth? This is your chance to set the rules of conduct in your organization. Every organization has different strategies and tactics, so feel free to be creative. Going back to our example, we have a goal to hire 100 sheriffs. Our faction recruits sheriffs by saving orphans on the street and raising them to become law enforcers. These boys and girls are molded into crime fighters in temples by paladins. They memorize the Book of Laws and learn to always tell the truth. Alternatively, maybe your faction earns money through donations to hire retired knights from the army to uphold laws. This is your chance to be creative and fun. My advice is to have a mix of traditional and unique faction abilities, so your world feels distinct and relatable. Too many new ideas and it can be hard for players to imagine what your faction does. Too many traditional ideas and your faction will seem dull and uninteresting. Striking a balance is best. The next level down are notable characters. These are the points of contact that allow your players to interact with your faction. What kind of relationship do you want with your players? There are a ton of options here. For example, let's say our faction is called the Clerics. During our first adventure with the players, a priest named Father John introduces himself to the party and heals their injuries. He offers to help them learn about religions at the temple and gives them a copy of his prayer book. He preaches every week and invites them to come. In this case, I built a friendly relationship with the players based on mutual respect between peers. I give them at least 3 easy ways to interact with that character, which can lead to events, and quests. For example, maybe they see a brawl at the temple during the sermon. Maybe they seek Father John for healing and discover that he is sick with the plague. The key is to create multiple reasons for the players to interact with your characters. Give them at least 3, and maybe more, reasons to pay them a visit. They don't all have to be service-based. Maybe Father John likes fishing, and he invites the players to go to the lake with him. Maybe have each character give the players a quest opportunity. After you craft a point of contact with your faction, make a few more. Ideally, you want your players to have multiple ways to bond with your organization. I would recommend somewhere between 2 to 5 faction members that your players can interact with. You want to give your players freedom to choose who they contact within the organization, because some contacts will have different relationships with the players. The biggest mistake for new Dungeon Masters is only having one point of contact for each faction and having only one reason to make contact. This leads to poor player engagement, which is bad. If you are in a tough spot and cannot make new faction characters, then I recommend creating a Dropbox or messenger service to send requests to that organization. The last level down are the observations and history of your organization. Essentially, you should ask yourself how your faction looks to the players from the outside. What rumors do they hear about your organization? How do your faction agents dress? When the players are walking down the road, what do they see? Bring your organization to life by describing what colors and garments they wear. Describe how they smell and what foods they eat. Are they rich or poor? What classes or races join their organization? Where can they be found? For example, our faction members are mainly Aasimar clerics that wear white togas. They fly around the city holding sunflowers and singing songs. However, you once saw an Aasimar smite a thief with a passionate smile on his face. It was quite disturbing because he went back to singing after dropping the dead thief in the moat. These kinds of descriptions should happen every adventure to remind your players that your faction exists. It doesn't need to be long, but you should build interest in your organization through illustrations and rumors. Congratulations! If you know all of these elements, then you have graduated from a beginner Dungeon Master to an intermediate Dungeon Master. The next step is creating multiple factions, and you should aim for 2 to 5 total. There are lots of benefits from creating multiple factions. The most important reason is that players love it when different factions fight each other in a grand game of power and politics. Almost all of the great movies of our time, including Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, have multiple factions. There are countless popular games like Assassin's Creed and The Witcher and Red Dead Redemption 2 and so many more that use factions to enhance its gameplay. They help us explore unique cultures and perspectives in the world you are building. Factions bring the world to life. These are the groups that make worlds memorable and remarkable. However, you will find that there is not enough time in your adventure for too many factions. You don't want to turn your adventure into a history lesson or make a list of characters so long your players can't remember their names. My recommendation is to empower your players to name some characters in the adventure. This encourages player agency and makes remembering names easier. Prepare a few concise and vivid descriptions of current events to bring your guilds to life. All you need to do is wait for the right opportunity to share. If you have a hard time deciding when, I suggest sharing when players travel through town or go shopping for items or do downtime. The next step is faction interactions, and this is where we separate the intermediate Dungeon Masters from the expert Dungeon Masters. In this stage, we want to constantly challenge our players with impactful choices that directly shape future events and power dynamics. Ideally, give our players 2 to 5 faction choices per adventure. Normal Dungeon Masters know how to do this in a simple way. For example, they give players the choice of which faction to share secret information with, or which faction to do missions for. Those are tried and true methods that work, but are boring. I think we can do better than adding up renown points for doing missions. Instead, frame your choices as puzzles with risks and rewards in game theory. For example, each organization desperately wants the players to do a side quest, and the players have different allegiances. How do they balance which side quest to prioritize? The answer is that the players use game theory to trigger a bidding war to increase their reward with all the factions. What if one faction becomes too powerful and suppresses the other factions? If they become a monopoly, they will rig the market and pay our heroes less than they deserve. Let your players know about this so they can decide what to do. Another tip is to add opportunities to influence organizations to do actions. If players can persuade the nobles to cancel patrols along the roads, this will pressure the guilds to hire more adventurers to guard their trade caravans. If the players convince the clerics to declare a holy war, then there will be a huge demand for supplies from the guilds. Maybe this is a chance to make a side deal with the guilds to earn a magic item in exchange for the profits from increasing demand. Give your players windows of opportunity to make fantastic bargains. These moments will make your players lifetime fans of your campaign. When your players take advantage of these exploits, make sure to encourage and praise them. They will be more creative and engaged as a result. The hard part is deciding if their ideas should succeed. On one hand, players should be rewarded for creating new ideas because it improves player agency. On the other hand, our job as Dungeon Masters is to challenge our players. Thus, I recommend saying yes to their ideas, but adding complications depending on how difficult the ideas are. For example, if you want to convince the clerics to slay an evil dragon, you would need to prove that the dragon is evil and recruit paladins to help them fight. Try to keep the complications and obstacles achievable within 1 to 3 game sessions. One common mistake for Dungeon Masters is limiting the factions that players can work with after they do a mission for another faction. It is understandable that other organizations would be suspicious of your players after they do a quest for their rivals, but this is also an opportunity to steal a valuable hero from your adversary. Let your players know that they can switch allegiances. Tempt them with offers of riches or new powers to switch sides. Going back to our earlier example, let's say the players are working for the clerics. What if the nobles go to your players and offer them new battlemaster maneuvers or spells or magic items to spy for them? They promise to help the players if they are caught. Players might switch sides with that kind of offer. My last piece of advice is to add friends and enemies to each faction. This makes it less obvious which team the players should join. Maybe you are friendly with the paladins in the clerics guild because you catch criminals. However, the priests do not like you because you follow a different god. Let them know that all the options are available. Thank you for tuning in. Please scroll down to the video comments section and tell us what you think. How would you make factions better? I'm sure you have a few great ideas. Please consider giving the video a thumbs up. It helps a lot.